Hi, and thanks for joining again. Today I'd like to talk to you about how you can use some simple guidelines for composition and apply them to your customers' photos by careful cropping. Usually when we're measuring a customer's art for matting, we come in on the image about 1/8 of an inch or so. Sometimes we'll come in more, but generally we show as much of the image as possible. Artists know and usually follow basic, time-tested guidelines for composition, and if they break the rules, it's deliberate. We respect those decisions by not cropping the image and preserving the original proportions as much as possible. It's not our place to alter their intent. Let's take a look at how we can apply some of these principles to your customers' photos. More than likely, your customer is not a professional photographer or artist. They may not know about these rules or may not apply them as they're trying to capture a spontaneous moment before it passes. By educating them about these rules of composition and applying them through the matting, we can make casual snapshots into something more artistic and satisfying. One of the most basic rules of composition is the rule of thirds. The idea is that you divide a picture into thirds horizontally and vertically, and then place the subject or focal point at one of the 4 intersections. The eye naturally gravitates to these points, and placing the subject there creates a natural, pleasing composition. In this photo, shot by a professional, the subjects are placed at an intersection and the horizon falls on one of the horizontal lines, just as you saw in the previous example. This picture was a casual shot from a vacation. The photographer did what most people would normally do and put the focal point of the island in the center. Let's see what we get when we use the rule of thirds. Now the horizon is at one of the horizontal lines and the island is at an intersection. A dramatic change, but it's a more pleasing composition, and most people, even if they're not aware of the rule of thirds, would agree that it's improved. They probably just can't put their finger on the reason why. Placing the before and after side by side, we can see that even though we're cropping a little bit of the picture out, nothing important is lost, and your customer will be happier that her photo now looks more like something an artist would create. By the way, this would be a good place to mention that even though we're talking about cropping, and we might even say something like, we'll cut a little bit of the picture off, we really aren't trimming the photo. We're just adjusting the size of the matte opening and covering a little more of the photo. You might mention that to your customers if they're concerned about that. Here's another example. This picture is pretty good to begin with. The subject is well positioned, but the horizon is at the halfway point. Because of this, he looks like he's sinking down in the picture. Now we have our grid lines and have adjusted things a little bit. The horizon is now near the upper 1/3 point, and his eyes are at the 1/3 point from the right and vertically. We took this from a pretty good picture to one that anyone would be happy to have framed and on the wall. Looking at the before and after, you can see that the image is a little smaller. The difference may be more dramatic in other photos, so if you offer scanning and printing services, this would be a great opportunity to print a larger version to work with. To get your customers on board, it's always a big help to show them. If you have a visualization system, you could use that, or if it's convenient, you could show them the cropping in Photoshop. A quick and low-tech alternative is to use 2 matte samples to show how the cropped image would look. Let's have a look at the next idea, headroom. This is something we consider mainly with portraits, and it's the space above the subject's head. With too little head space, the portrait looks crowded. Too much, and the subject looks like she's sinking down. Too much head space was also one of the issues in the previous photo. In a well-composed portrait with the proper amount of headroom, the subject's eyes are at or close to the 1/3 line. This example was done by a professional photographer, but you see that the subject's eyes are closer to the center of the photo. Here the photo has been cropped so that the eyes are at the 1/3 line. Either one of the photos would have worked and been okay, but when we see them side by side, one just looks better. Just that small adjustment of headroom makes the portrait more intimate and brings an added prominence to this young gentleman. Here in this photo, we have the opposite problem, that of too little headroom and crowding. If you offer scanning and printing, you might be able to add a little more of the background to the top in Photoshop, but that's not an option for all of us. If that's the case, using a wider bottom mat close to the color of the background provides a bit of headroom and opens the photo up. This is a good place to use a reverse bevel or a color core mat. Lead room is similar to headroom, except it applies to the space in front of the subject. This comes into play with a subject in profile or something or someone in motion, like this runner. In this original composition, he has plenty of lead room, and it's clear where he's running to and that he's not about to hit a wall. If the picture is cropped like this, he's literally running out of the frame and you get the feeling he's about to run into something. Imagine if this were a photo of a race car. It wouldn't be a comfortable picture to look at. In this version, the photo has been cropped from the left, cutting out some of the extraneous background and placing him at a vertical 1/3 line, but leaving him plenty of lead room. Now let's have a look at this picture. As we saw in one of the first examples, the subject is in the middle. There's a good amount of lead room, but centering the subject makes for a rather static image. Here the right side has been cropped so that the shuttle and its 747 are close to a 1/3 line. The proportions are good and there's plenty of lead room. The horizon is also at a 1/3 line, and the sky could have been cropped just a little to put the shuttle at a 1/3 horizontal line. This would be a good place to consider what kind of a story your customer wants to tell with this picture. Was it the excitement of the crowd watching the shuttle fly by? Is the person in the bicycle helmet your customer? In either case, this photo is great as it is. Let's have a look at what we can get with some more dramatic cropping. If you really want to make the shuttle the star of this picture, a dramatic crop like this would do it. Being isolated against the sky and with plenty of lead room, there's a great sense of motion and no question of what the subject is. It's a much more dramatic image now. Here you can see how little of the original photo remains after this extreme cropping. This would be another great opportunity to print a much larger version of the photo. We've looked at the idea of head space and lead space. Now let's look at its polar opposite, the idea of filling the frame. Filling the frame is the technique of filling the photo with the subject with very little space around it. You may remember this haunting image from the National Geographic cover, a fantastic photo to begin with. When it's cropped to fill the frame, though, it takes on a new feeling, a very intimate encounter with this young lady and her piercing eyes. You just can't escape them. Filling the frame creates a very in-your-face, immediate experience with the artwork. This little guy is definitely in your face. And yes, there are parts that are cut off in the frame. That's the idea. This is a great technique to use with nature photography. This started out as a pretty average picture of a rose, but when tightly cropped like this, it becomes a much more compelling piece. Imagine this photo printed at 48 inches square. It would be quite a focal point. And think of how this would look with a colorful butterfly. Finally, let's take a look at something called the Dutch angle. Even if you don't know about it, you've seen it. It's also sometimes called the Batman angle. It's used mainly in movies to create a sense of unease or disorientation in the viewer by tilting the camera at an angle. In photography, it can lend an edgy or off-kilter feel. Any horizontal or vertical lines are tilted at an obvious angle. In this photo, the Elizabeth Tower is imposing and the cloudy sky is moody. Put it at an angle, and it's ominous. In framing, there probably aren't many times when we want to create unease or disorientation, but we can use it when we want things to be a little fun, whimsical, or spontaneous. You might remember this little guy, who's always all a little off-kilter on his own, and he makes his own Dutch angle. It was a happy accident that all the lines in the background were already at an angle. This picture of folks celebrating Oktoberfest is a good one, but putting it at an angle, though, conveys even more of a sense of fun and partying. It also feels more candid and in the moment, like someone caught the moment spontaneously. Speaking of angles, be careful with pictures like this. Pictures at the beach inevitably show the horizon tilted. It's easy enough to correct this in adjusting the mat opening and how the photo is positioned, but something else will probably end up being off or cropped out. Make sure you discuss this with your customer. By the way, I'll admit I spent a minute adjusting this picture in Photoshop and filling in the bit of missing sky that came about when I rotated it to straighten the waterline. As always, if you want to use these composition techniques, it's much easier if you can show your customers some examples. You can use frame examples of artwork and photography to show basic composition techniques like the rules of third, but customers might not be able to relate it to their own photos. Some before and after examples, like we've looked at here, can be very helpful. Not all of them have to be framed. You could have a few mounted and matted examples ready to show and explain what you would do with their pictures. So there we are, 5 different rules of thumbs and techniques you can apply every day to your customers' travel pictures, photos of kids, and family snapshots. Your customer will be happy to have a professional quality piece of framed photography on their wall, and the fact that they took that picture makes it that much better.